must prepare, child, for the earth is bleeding and the harvest is upon us.
I have no other options.
NANI?!
What's up guys, and for those who are waiting for the Vampire review, you will have to wait till the next one, because in Aerogame news, Evenicle is out and I'm so excited! Finally, another game from Alicesoft, courtesy of Manga Gamer, and this time it's a fresh, new, right out the oven IP, focused on saving the world and marrying as many hot chicks as you can along the way. So no more words, let's just go ahead and start the review. The story of Evenicle is about a man who wants to fuck his sisters.
10 out of 10.
That's honestly how this game starts, and I love it. Alicesoft pulling zero punches right out the gate with what kind of game this is going to be. You play as Asterisk, who is on a quest to screw his two sisters, but is restrained by the rules of the universe he resides in. You see, long before the story began, the world was a ravaged wasteland where nothing could prosper. That was until the goddess Mother Eve arrived and blessed the people of the land with the ability to harvest resources, cook food, and otherwise live happily if you follow her two core tenets. Do not kill your fellow humans, and no sex without marriage. Luckily, there isn't out here. Aster can simply become a knight, a type of soldier blessed by the church in order to be allowed 2 wives and the ability to slaughter thousands. So with all that pretext, we now cut to our protagonist. Yeah, sounds about right. In order to marry both of his sisters, they send him out on a grand quest to become a knight, and he almost drowns traveling across the ocean, because he's just so excited about his adventure that he felt the boat was not fast enough transportation.
So, how do you like my swimming?
That's pretty much our hero in a nutshell, a perverted idiot who wants to screw as many women as possible while actually going through all the hoops to get their consent, unlike someone else. He is rescued by a mysterious blonde snack by the name of Richie Eden, who is later revealed to be a princess of the Kingdom of Eden. Clearly she's accurately named. He also encounters a knight by the name of Ramius Dryson, also known as the Loner Knight, who at first acts very cold to the main character, but after doing a tutorial quest to curry her favor, it's revealed that she's just kinda awkward and really, really dumb.
1、2、3、4、5。うるさい。もう数え直しじゃないか。
Her heart's in the right place though, which is shown when she accepts a mission to rescue a walking Megane fetish. And let's rip off that band-aid right now. If you're not a fan of non-con, there will be some scenes that will turn you off, but we'll talk more about that in the miscellaneous section. The mission is tantamount to suicide, but after being pestered by Aster, she grants him the lowest rank of knight to allow him to fight right before Aster does what Aster does best. And I guess we're on our own now. Sadly, Aster is too late and she has already been assaulted by the time he gets there, and because of Mother Eve's commandments, she loses her blessings and becomes an outlaw. This is one of those things that I actually felt was a bit underrepresented in the game, the whole unwillingly becoming an outlaw factor in the commandments. It does get a bit of focus during the game, but not enough to really detail the experience of being an outlaw. Instead, they are mostly regulated to being grunt forces that the heroes have to deal with. Later on, Aster and Ramius, now married after a series of unfortunate events, reunite with Richie as she discovers the outlaws harassing her kingdom are being directed by a group known as Snakecrest, a faction with the sole desire to start a war in the near utopian land of Evenicle. Now, starting a war might sound a bit underwhelming, but the motivations of each leader of Snake Crest are unique and interesting enough to make up for that. With that knowledge, Richie recruits Aster, turning him into a true knight so that they can fight Snake Crest together, and so that Aster gets plenty of opportunities to prove himself as a knight in order to get promoted to have more wife slots. As the game progresses, Aster fights against the corruption of Snake Crest in a variety of different fantasy locations: hot deserts, deep forests, frozen tundras. The locations are quite varied and the player gets a chance to explore every inch of it as they play through the game. On the journey, Aster's group finds that dealing with Snake Crest is going to take a fair bit more manpower, so you will be enlisting the help of plenty of unique characters and focusing on your companion/wives. As far as the ones I've already introduced go, Ramius along the journey reveals herself to be a massive pervert to the point that it becomes even more of a defining trait than her IQ.
隠しておいたエロ本が掃除をした親父に見つけられて机の上に置かれるような女だが本当にいいんだな。
While Richie kinda has this generic princess thing going on, but she does have a few key personality traits that pop up during the story, like being a Hanny xenophobe.
ダメ逃がさない私からは逃げられないわよ。待って僕悪いハニーじゃない。あらいいハニーは割れたハニーだけよ。
Later on, you get the lolly ninja Goody-Gooda,
Stop it.
a bundle of positivity and joy who probably has the highest body count of the entire group. But last but not least, you also have the tactician Catherine Lopfiel,
I can't stop this feeling.
a reclusive, narcissistic otaku who, as far as I'm concerned, is right next to Ramius in regards to who is best girl. I mean, plenty animes have waifu bait, but Kath is a rare example of what an otaku wife would actually be like rather than the fantasy that is a waifu, and she pulls it off flawlessly. Outside of your team, the other characters are interesting, fun, and unique to interact with, meeting kings, knights, merchants, inventors, and even a surprise inclusion of the Kalar race from the Rant series. Speaking of rants, many aspects of other Alicesoft titles do show up in this game, including monsters like the Gal monsters and Hannies, as well as certain items and locations. It's pretty fun to look for some of the Easter eggs and references to other games.
Bring his face up. Full screen. There's a reflection.
Now, I'm not gonna pull any punches here, and I'ma just straight up tell you this game is linear. Narratively speaking, it gives the illusion of choice early on with a branch that looks like it came straight out of Sengoku Rants. But picking the non-heroic option does nothing but show you an entertaining bad end. Instead of trying to make a decent open-ended story, it goes for a very strong linear narrative, where you fight enemies, unlock key abilities, and even acquire new wives in a specific order. I was a little put off once I realized that, but admittedly, it allows scenes to have many more character interactions than an open game would allow. The story moments themselves are always fun though, exploring various topics within the world, getting to know certain characters better, and even talking about some controversial topics that games don't normally touch. At times the story can get pretty dark, especially when Aster and co get a crash course in corrupt politics, but overall the story has an upbeat feel to it, which I think is kind of a staple of Alicesoft titles. There are some points in the story where the plot direction is rather obvious, even to the point that the otaku of the group in-game can sense that bullshit video game things are about to happen.
Oh, do ya?
But there are also some genuinely good twists to the story that had me floored. Obviously, I won't say any hard spoilers, but much like a Marvel movie, you got to see those after credits. Moving on to a more technical note, I really liked how the UI was done in this game. Alicesoft still seems to have not become fully comfortable with the 16:9 resolution, but they did use the space well in my opinion. They had the HP bars use up all the empty space a square playing screen normally causes on a more modern resolution, and when a CG is shown, it takes up the entire screen in all its HD glory.
It's beautiful.
Fun note, when you idle for a bit on the world map, the characters end up talking to each other, reminding the player of what quest they have running in the background. That doesn't make up for a lack of a quest log though, especially since the dialogue is quite random, and when I needed a bit of a reminder of the locations of a certain quest, I had to actually just wait there, staring at the screen until one of them randomly brought up the topic. The other technical features in Evenicle were pretty surprising. Having a well fleshed out in-game options menu, you can see the changes to the message speed as you mess around with the sliders, changing the colors of previous read messages, altering the way skip and auto modes are handled, and even changing aspects of the message window. You can't alter the transparency of CG scenes though, and that is disappointing when you're trying to record footage that you know needs to be censored, but that's an annoyance that people just playing the game won't need to deal with. Other options do things like change the cursor control scheme, mess around with the display settings, which is helpful for people with multi-monitor settings, raise or lower the 3D settings for lower performance computers, and even includes touch controls, which I guess are for people with tablet style computers. A lot of options for an eroge, just showing how much effort was put into this game, bringing it up to standards that most other genres of modern games already have. Evenicle's story is simply fantastic, and despite being a new IP, is right up there with the Rants and Die series, two well-loved franchises also made by Alicesoft. The story is adventurous, the characters are fun, and the presentation is exactly the kind of advancement I want from eroge as a whole. But enough about the story, this isn't just a book, now it's time to talk about gameplay. As an RPG, Evenicle's gameplay is not the most riveting thing in existence, but I'm gonna do my best here, and I actually do think it does pretty well with the tools they put on the table, particularly with exploration, so let's open up with that. Exploration in Evenicle is a very strong part of the game, with plenty of little rewards sprinkled across the map. You can go around finding various heart points to give cute little scenes between Aster and his wives, you can go looking for chests hidden in the map, fish random items, and even go looking for landmarks in the world for you and your team to comment on. The amount of land to traverse is quite plentiful, although it does prevent you from accessing many directions until the plot allows. The rewards for doing so are kinda lackluster, since they are almost all stat boosting items in a game with only one accessory slot per character. The single item slot was a bit weak when thinking about character building, but the way skills work does add a little bit more to that. Instead of learning skills through leveling, most skills are obtained through chests, the combat itself is a slightly streamlined version of most RPG battle systems. Your team is split between a front line with your tanky teammates like Aster, Ramius, and Goody Gooda for some reason, while your more squishy teammates, Richie and Kath, sit in the back. There is no mana system in this game, instead you have a BP resource, which builds up over time and can be consumed for various skills. The skills that you can learn vary from attacks that deal bonus damage to certain enemies, to magic skills, some that can only be used a limited amount of times per battle, to even passive skills that simply make certain characters more useful in their roles. The most unique thing about the battle system though is how it handles critical hits. When a unit finishes an attack, there is a chance that their next attack will be empowered, dealing increased damage. This combat system is pretty easy to understand, and you don't need to do any sort of mental gymnastics to understand the proper way to fight certain enemies. An interesting thing to note for the Sengoku Rants fans out there, is that the skills in this game are so much more effective than they were in that game. If something says it does bonus damage to someone, it means free crits. Guarding allies procs almost all the time as long as you occasionally refresh the skill. Powerful spells don't take forever and a day to charge up, and most importantly, assassinating an enemy is a reliable tool in this game. If you don't like fighting all that much, well, first of all, RPGs might not be for you, but ignoring that, despite the game having a random encounter system, there are ways to manipulate it. The gauge in the corner controls when enemies show up, only attacking after it's filled, and walking alongside town roads drastically reduces how quickly it builds up. You can also auto-battle your way through trash enemies, but after Gurigura is recruited, the world is your oyster because she holds the one ability to auto-win fights against enemies lower level than you, making backtracking and exploring much less tedious than most RPGs. She also has a skill for lowering the encounter rates themselves, but when you auto-win, you get XP, as well as a cute shot of Gurigura, but seriously.
It's free real estate.
The last thing to note are the mega monsters in the game. These enemies can be found super early into the game, even at level 1, but trying to fight them that early is... Sadly, much like the rewards for other activities in the game, beating these bosses basically gives you a moderately strong stat boost item and a heaping amount of pride and accomplishment. The game could have at least thrown in a CG for some of these, but speaking of CGs, I think I've covered what I want to here, so it's time to summarize. The gameplay in Evenicle is pretty standard for an RPG, if not a bit simplified, but in some ways that may have helped the game. Not having to micromanage every major boss battle and go through a bunch of menus like many RPGs have you, lets the boss fight progress smoothly. Running around the map was plenty of fun despite lacking in gameplay rewards, simply because of how enjoyable the lore and dialogue rewards were. And like I said earlier, Gurigura made getting to all these events much less of a hassle than it could have been. Now, if you were thinking this section's a little bit short, then you would be correct, because some of the aspects of this game I'm actually saving for the Eroge section. So let's go ahead and move on to the good stuff, shall we? Now, I know this is the Eroge section, but Evenicle is a well-blended adult RPG, so there were some gameplay elements that I didn't include in my gameplay section simply because I could better talk about them in the Eroge section. So let's go ahead and get started. During your journey, you will be facing all sorts of enemies, but one constant in Alicesoft games are the inclusion of the gal monsters, sexy female monsters that exist to breed with the male guy monsters to create more monsters. Early on, Ramis gains the ability to capture them, earning you an accessory version of the gal monster in question, as well as a full CG of them tied up in ropes. Interestingly enough, these CGs are not counted in the gallery, and make sure you're sitting down for this because even without factoring the 24 gal monster shots, Evenicle contains a whopping 113 CGs. And most of them are indeed H content, and variants do not take up multiple slots. Excuse my French, but there's a lot of hanky-panky in Evenicle. The types of lewd content in Evenicle are quite varied, much like any other Alicesoft made Eroge. Obviously, Alicesoft's trademark non-consensual content is present, but unlike some of their other games, that takes a backseat to good old Christian marital sex. With that in mind, the game contains all sorts of fetishes like twins, boob jobs, gender bending, butt stuff, tentacles, BDSM. Basically, there is something for everyone in this game, with the major focus being everyone leaving the scene with a positive feeling on life. Most of the time. Another cool feature in Evenicle that is actually a callback to the Rant series is the level up mechanic. When your party gains enough XP, they can visit a town to see after the level up person, and if you have ever played a Rants game, you know what I'm about to say. Yes, after achieving enough level ups, your leveler will reward you with some fan service, But unlike the Rance games, instead of this being simply a change of the character's sprite, it is instead a series of CGs with her getting more and more daring as your level increases. Surprisingly enough, this is one of the few erogates that I can't really find any notable flaws or annoyances with when it comes to ero content. Despite my taste in 8 scenes leaning towards shorter and more humorous content, the writing here does a good job in providing humorous, heartwarming, and above all sexy content for all the scenes, while still keeping them rather lengthy. Side quests in the game are another area where you can find H content. While the main story is quite linear, there are multiple opportunities to sign up for some side quests, if you take the time to explore, and sometimes backtrack to various churches and towns. The churches in particular have a fun little quest to play if you take the time to visit each and every one in a kingdom, culminating in a very special reward, and by reward I mean you know what I mean. The last important ero topic I should bring up here is the love gauge sitting in the bottom corner of the screen. As Aster fights monsters with his harem, the gauge slowly fills up, and once it reaches its maximum, unlocks a new house scene to be viewed. These house scenes are just plain adorable, with up to 5 of them for Aster's combat wives and 3 of them for the more houseborn ones. And while some of these are innocent enough, the vast majority end in H scenes between Aster and his chosen wife. I do wish that the game simply allowed the scenes to be viewed without having to go back to the house, since the gauge does not continue building up until after a new scene is unlocked, encouraging the player to effectively stop whatever they were doing, saving the country, and just head back home.
Did I leave the stove on?
With all that covered, now I think it's about time to address the elephant in the room. It's been long enough. This art seems familiar, doesn't it? Well, it should be, because the main artist for Evenicle is none other than Nan Yaegashi. Known best for his art in the Senran Kagura franchise, and longtime viewers of this channel may have remembered me doing a mod review on how to quote-unquote uncensor the franchise. Well this is about as uncensored as you can get, don't you think? The H content in Evenicle is top notch, just as I would expect from Alicesoft. They picked a great artist for not only the scenes but the rest of the game too. The content is plentiful, and the story is built from the ground up to not make the inclusion of H content seem out of place. But most importantly, I need you to focus on what I'm about to say here. The most important accomplishment this game does is that every, and I mean every, female character with a sprite gets an H scene. And when your main character's goal is to scout out every potential wife like Kakyoin at a softball tournament, that's kind of important. But not every game has the CG space to pull that off. Even Alicesoft has at times failed to deliver. So to see Evenicle do what Sengoku freaking Rance failed to do puts a real smile on my face. But the time for praise is over. It's about time I wrapped up this video, so let's go ahead to my final thoughts. This game's perfect to buy it. Okay, seriously, I had mad high expectations going into Evenicle, and despite that, it still blew me away with how much fun the game ended up being. I was fully immersed in the title, resonating with the hero's struggle, engaging with the history of the world, and going out of my way not only to beat the game in a timely manner, but also to 100% its extra content. Every inch of this game just oozed high quality, from its artwork to its voices and especially its music, hot damn. This is easily a steal for me, but looking at this game from an objective perspective, or at least as best as I can make here, the combat system could have had a bit more flair added into it, and that does infect some of the more minor aspects of the game, such as equipment options and in-game rewards. One other thing, and it does go without saying, is that much like other pure RPGs, the replay value really isn't there. But after a little bit of reflection, I have to say that my final rating for Evenicle, with a price of $44.95, is still going to have to be a steal minus. Not literally. Alicesoft has once again come out with an eroge title that had solid gameplay and great adult content, but keep in mind that as a pure RPG with no tactical content or alternate routes, replay value is a lot more tied to if you want to experience the story again, rather than go through all the motions of roleplay combat. As far as I'm concerned though,
Round 2, fight!
I had way too much fun with this title to give it anything other than a steal, but I will recognize that the score does drop to a buy, and not even a buy plus if you are really hankering for a deep combat and character building system to sink your teeth or other things in. The minus in particular really comes down to the price. In the grand scheme of gaming, I think $45 might, and let me stress the word might, be a bit much for this title, or at least its amount of content. But in regards to the arrow scene only,
Best king.
but you know, maybe a steal rating is the result of my bias on Haywire, even with the minus attached. So make sure to leave your own thoughts on this game in the comment section below, because I'm genuinely interested in whether $45 is a must-buy price for something like this. But with that said, it's about time to wrap up this video and go back to the review I was previously going to do. So I'll see you guys next time with the Vampire review. Later!